The sun shone high above the municipal stadium of Tlaquepaque. The stands, covered in colorful banners and agitated voices, vibrated with an enthusiasm that only children's soccer can generate. In the air, the smell of roasted corn mixed with the sweetness of cotton candy and the slight sweat of anticipation. Ethan Vance, an entrepreneur famous for his fortune and discretion, was there, surrounded by photographers and security guards. He came only to hand out medals, take a few photos, and return to his business quickly. Or at least, that was the plan. But as soon as the game began, something unexpected pulled him out of the protocol. In the middle of the field, a small 6-year-old goalkeeper, with blue gloves too big for his tiny hands, walked in a curious way. He would tap the tip of his right foot on the ground, as if to gain balance. Ethan frowned. That gesture was his, an old tic, a childhood habit that no one else had. That couldn't be a coincidence. Ethan held his breath for an instant. The boy had a stubborn cowlick on the crown of his head, the same slightly arched eyebrow, and a look that hurt. It was so familiar. It wasn't just intensity. It was hunger. A hunger for the ball, for approval, for something he perhaps didn't yet know how to name. Ethan felt his heart race, and it wasn't because of the game. Around him, improvised cheerleaders beat drums and waved handmade flags. Children laughed, parents shouted instructions, and the referee blew his whistle with more energy than authority. But for Ethan, all that began to fade. The scoreboard seemed distant. The noise became a murmur. Only the boy in the goal remained focused, as if an invisible lens isolated him from the rest of the world. It was then that Ethan saw, on the other side of the fence, someone he hadn't seen in years. Sitting with a firm posture, holding a small water bottle, was Clara Hayes, the ex-girlfriend he had left behind when he chose success. The woman who loved him when he was still just a broke dreamer with a fire in his eyes. Ethan didn't need more than a second to recognize her. She still bit her lip when the game got tense. She still had that discreet, almost silent strength that always made him feel small, and at the same time, seen. In that instant, 3 voices crossed without a word. Ethan, the boy goalkeeper, and Clara. The present collided with the past like a wave returning from the sea, bringing everything that was forgotten. Ethan tried to hide his unease, but his face could no longer conceal it. Could that child be his? With every save, the boy earned more applause. He jumped with agility, scolded the defenders like a small general, and when he let in a goal, he told the team to hold their heads high. Ethan, still in silence, watched it all. He felt his stomach churning. The boy was good, but it wasn't just that. It was the strange feeling that was pressing on his chest. A premonition that didn't come from his brain, but from his body. One of those you try to ignore but can't. The game was coming to an end. The tension grew. It was a penalty kick. The entire stadium held its breath. The boy walked to the center of the goal, touched a red ribbon tied to his wrist, and got into position. Ethan didn't blink. The shot was strong, to the left corner. The boy flew, literally flew, and saved it. The stands erupted in cheers. Ethan felt his eyes moisten without quite understanding why. In the end, Ethan was called to the center of the field for the ceremony. He walked with strange steps, as if the ground had changed texture. He handed out medals, shook hands, but when he knelt before the small goalkeeper, he hesitated for a second. He noticed the discreet freckles, the brown sparkle in his eyes. "Congratulations, champ," he said, his voice hoarse. The boy replied with a small smile that seemed to hide a secret. Ethan remained there, in the center of the field. He couldn't take his eyes off the boy. It wasn't just the way he walked. There was something deeper in that child, a reflection, a living memory. It was as if he were looking at a part of himself that had been forgotten in some corner of his soul. The boy had the same stubbornness in his eyes that Ethan remembered carrying in his childhood. That mix of defiance and curiosity, like someone who faces the world without fear, but with an immense hunger to be accepted. Ethan recognized the gesture of adjusting the elastic of his glove on his wrist, the habit of taking a deep breath before each play. They were old habits, his own, from before life forced him to swallow his feelings. He tried to rationalize. It could be a coincidence. Kids imitate players. They watch videos. They learn quirks. But the heart didn't understand logic. Ethan felt a powerful discomfort, a warmth that was born in his chest and rose slowly. It was awe mixed with nostalgia. Nostalgia for something he didn't even know he had lost. The boy's gaze met his for an instant. And even without understanding, Ethan had the feeling that he had been truly seen. Not as a businessman, not as a public figure, but as someone who needed to remember who he was. The connection was brief, but left a mark, like a key discreetly turning in the lock of a door that had been locked for years. Ethan walked away from the field slowly, but his thoughts ran faster than he could control. Could it be possible? He remembered Clara. They had broken up 6 years ago. And yes, no, it was absurd, and at the same time it made perfect sense. Everything the boy did seemed loaded with clues, like a puzzle he never knew he was putting together. The game ended. The stands began to empty. But Ethan stood there for a few minutes, looking at the empty field. That image of the boy saving the penalty, touching the red ribbon on his wrist, wouldn't leave his head. Who would have given him that ribbon? His mother? And why? Was it superstition? Protection? Love? As he walked toward the exit, Ethan knew that something had changed. He still didn't know what he would do with it, but he was sure it wasn't just any coincidence. That thing had a name, a face, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was the reason he was there that day, in that place, at that exact moment. What do you think is going through Ethan's mind right now? Is he ready to face the past? Comment your thoughts below. A past that won't stay buried. Ethan was already on his way to the exit when something made him stop. Perhaps it was a reflection, a familiar movement in the crowd. When he looked more closely at the stands, he felt a blow to his stomach. There she was, Clara, sitting in the middle row, holding a small water bottle, her eyes vibrant, but silent. It was her, without a doubt. Time had not erased what he recognized in her, the firm way she sat, the absolute concentration on the game, and that old habit of biting her lower lip when she got tense. Ethan felt the ground sink for a second. He didn't expect to see her, not there, not that day, and especially not with a boy who could be his son. The past came back in full, like a storm. Clara didn't seem surprised to see him, but she didn't smile or wave either. She just looked for an instant and returned her eyes to the field as if nothing had happened. For Ethan, that hurt more than any words. It was her silence that screamed, a silence full of history, of old grudges, of everything that was left unsaid. Ethan's heart raced as if it were trying to make up for the years he pretended not to feel anything. He remembered the conversations in the small room in Puebla, the ideas of starting a business together, her laugh when he mispronounced Spanish trying to impress. And he also remembered the day he left without looking back. He chose security, career progression, a promising future, and left love in the past. The problem is that the past doesn't like to be forgotten. It waits, silent, patient, and when it returns, it doesn't ask for permission. It returns with everything. As in that moment, when Clara was there within sight, and Ethan could only think about everything he had lost, about everything he might still be able to fix if it wasn't too late. The game was over, but inside him, another battle was beginning. Ethan realized he couldn't just leave. That meeting or reunion was a warning. Something needed to be said. Something needed to be done. But how to start? After so much time, so much distance, and so much silence, what do you say to someone you hurt with your choice? Clara, for her part, maintained her composure, but inside, her heart was also beating differently. She saw him arrive. She knew one day this might happen, but nothing prepares you for the moment life comes full circle and puts you face to face with someone who became a ghost. And Ethan was just that, a ghost she had learned to ignore. Until now, she stayed still because she knew words could be deceiving. He was good with speeches. She had already heard promises that didn't withstand the pressure of success, but even from afar, she saw something in his eyes, something confused, almost childish, as if he were seeing the world for the first time after years in the dark. Ethan took a step toward the stands. He wanted to say something, anything, but he stopped. Clara faced him, without anger, without pity, without haste. She just faced him, and it was in that brief, heavy instant that he understood. That story still existed. Not over, not forgotten, just dormant. And now, it was waking up with a question impossible to ignore. What if that child is really my son? Clara stood by the fence. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't avoiding his gaze either. It was as if she was testing how long he would last, facing the truth. Ethan looked at her, and in that long, silent look, he understood. There was something he never knew, something she chose not to tell, and for some reason, he never asked either. Perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of pride, or perhaps because he knew, deep down, that he had left something behind. Ethan felt a subtle rage at himself, at all the decisions he made, believing he knew what he was doing, at having turned his back on what was simple, to believe that complicating things was synonymous with winning. On that field, with the trophy in his hands and the past in front of him, victory lost its shine. What made sense now was just a question that was pressing on his chest. Who is this child? The crowd began to disperse. Children hugged their parents. Coaches took photos. Ethan stayed there, standing, his eyes following the small goalkeeper until he disappeared among his teammates. He still didn't know his name, but he felt that somehow he already knew him. And that scared him as much as it excited him. Clara walked away discreetly, taking the side door. Ethan wanted to go after her, but he hesitated. Was it too soon, or was it already too late? He knew that that moment, the children's tournament final, wasn't just about soccer. It was about secrets, about paths that crossed again, and about a truth that was knocking on the door. Because sometimes, what we are most afraid to discover is exactly what needs to be said. Do you think Clara should let Ethan back into her life? What about Leo? Comment your thoughts below. The past. A broke dreamer. Long before the flashes, the expensive suits, and the meetings with investors, Ethan was just a young man full of ideas and debts. He arrived in Puebla with a backpack on his back and an almost naive faith that he could change the world with a good idea and a little luck. It was in a neighborhood bakery, among sweetbreads and coffee with milk, that he saw Clara for the first time. She was behind the counter, in her apron, her hair pulled back carelessly, and a look that said more than words. Ethan asked for coffee and a sweetbread, but he got much more than that. She corrected his pronunciation, laughed at his accent, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at ease, as if he had found a safe place, or rather, a safe person. Days turned into weeks. Conversations turned into meetings. They saw each other after work. They walked through the city squares, talking about dreams, mistakes, fears. Ethan told her about his crazy plans to open a logistics startup. Clara talked about her physical education career, about her desire to teach children to believe in themselves. Together, they were simple. Together, they were complete. They didn't have a lot of money, but they had easy laughter. He brought ideas scribbled on napkins. She, cookies made by her mother. He talked too much about the future. She reminded him that the present also deserved attention. They were different, but they complemented each other like pieces that the world had not yet tried to separate. Clara liked the calmness with which Ethan listened to her. He, for his part, admired her silent strength. That way of getting up every day without complaining, even when everything seemed heavy, wasn't a soap opera love. It was a real love. One of those that are built little by little, in small gestures, like sharing an umbrella or remembering to turn off the bakery oven when she forgot. The mornings were of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread from Clara's mother's old oven. Sometimes they sat on the step of her house just to watch the street traffic. Ethan would tell her how he wanted to succeed one day. She would smile and ask, "And after you succeed, what will you want?" He always replied, "To be with you." For months they lived like that, without luxuries, but with an abundance of affection. When Ethan closed the first small contract, they ran together through the square, celebrating as if they had won the world. That night, he bought 2 empanadas and said, "One day I will give you whatever you want." She replied, "Just don't forget who you were before all this." But time is a restless animal, and along with the success Ethan so desperately sought, came the pressures. He started being invited to business events, elegant dinners, meetings with people who spoke more with their eyes than with their hearts. Little by little, that simple world he shared with Clara began to seem too small. He didn't say it out loud, but she felt it. She felt it in the absences, in the excuses, in the delays. She felt it when he started looking at his phone more than her eyes. Clara tried to understand, tried to wait, but she also knew how to protect herself. And perhaps deep down, she also knew that the purest love in the world doesn't survive if it's set aside for too long. It was during that time that the irrefutable proposal came, and with it, the most difficult choice of Ethan's life. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. A different path. Ethan's life was changing. After years of insisting on ideas no one understood, he was finally noticed. A group of investors from the north of the country became interested in his project, and with them came a concrete proposal: capital, structure, access to a new market. It was what he had always wanted, or at least believed he wanted. But not every proposal comes clean. There was a condition, the strangest and at the same time most dangerous of all. Ethan would need to improve his image. One of the investors said, in a polite but cold tone, that the company needed a solid person at the helm. Finally, they suggested a marriage with Olivia Vance, the daughter of a powerful industrialist. It was the perfect package to convince the market. Ethan listened to that, like someone listening to an absurdity disguised as an opportunity. At first, he even laughed, but he soon realized that no one was joking. Olivia was pretty, articulate, charismatic, and came from a family that opened doors with a single phone call. And more, she seemed willing to enter the game, to pretend whatever was necessary. Business is business. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Meetings, trips, presentations. Ethan tried to convince himself that it was just a phase, that he could fix it later, that Clara would understand. But inside, he knew that there was no justification that would ease the weight of that decision. Clara was not part of the package. She never would be. He avoided telling her. He said he was busy, that things were complicated, that he needed time. But Clara was not naive. When he finally showed up with a tired look and an absent body, she didn't need many words. She already knew. She just wanted to hear it from his mouth. And she did. The conversation was a battle. Ethan tried to explain with logic. He talked about contracts, about the future, about a unique opportunity. Clara replied with silence, then with tears, then with harsh, cutting words that he didn't expect from her. She said she couldn't compete with ambition. She said she loved who he was, not who he was becoming. Ethan remained silent. He wanted to ask her to wait, to trust, but he didn't have the courage. Deep down, he believed he was doing the right thing. That one day she would understand. That success would bring back what he was losing now. An illusion. Because there are things that, once broken, cannot be fixed with just time. And love demands courage. At the end of the argument, Clara turned around and went into the house. Ethan stayed there, standing, his heart pounding as if he were running. He didn't try to go in. He didn't knock on the door. He simply left. The next day, he accepted the deal. And with it, he accepted losing what was most real to him. Little did he know that in that same month, Clara would discover she was pregnant. The night everything broke, there were no loud screams or slamming doors. There was something more cutting. The silence between sentences. The absence of hands that once sought each other. Ethan arrived late, tense, already decided. Clara, on the other side of the room, felt her body harden even before she heard the news. Love, when it is about to end, gives a warning with the eyes. Ethan tried to start calmly. He said he needed to focus on the project, that things were out of control, that it was too much pressure. Clara listened, but she didn't listen, because none of that was new. What hurt was the tone, an empty tone, as if he were talking to a work colleague, not the woman who had shared his dreams for 2 years. She asked if there was someone else. He hesitated. He said no, that it was more complicated than that he needed to follow a path. And she, with a firm voice, asked, "And does that path have no place for me?" Ethan didn't know what to say. He fell silent. And in that silence, Clara had her answer. It was she who turned her back first. He stayed in the same place, looking at the floor, as if some magical answer would appear there. None came. Only emptiness. The next day, she packed some clothes in a backpack, told her mother she was going back to Guadalajara, and left. She didn't leave a note. She didn't cry in public, but it hurt with every step. Ethan watched her leave from a distance. He didn't run after her. He told himself that he was doing what was necessary, that it was just a phase, that one day she would understand. He repeated this so many times that he almost believed it. But at night, lying alone in a 5-star hotel room, he felt a cold that even the thickest blanket couldn't warm. Clara arrived at her mother's house with a tired face, but her head held high. She didn't tell her everything right away. She just said that the relationship had ended, that he had chosen another path. Her mother, Alara, took her in silence, as only mothers know how to do. Days later, the dizziness came, the missed period, the test, and then the certainty. She was pregnant. She didn't tell Ethan. She didn't want to ask for anything. She didn't want to explain. She felt that if he had asked, maybe she would have told him. But he didn't ask. He didn't call. He didn't show up. And that, more than anything else, sealed her decision. She would raise that child alone, not out of pride, but out of protection. because no love can flourish where there is abandonment. The weeks passed. Clara started working again at the neighborhood bakery. She did some odd jobs, like substitute teaching, and little by little she built her support network. Her belly grew, and with it, a strength grew that she didn't even know she had. She cried sometimes, yes, at night mostly, but in the morning she was on her feet and with her head held high. Ethan continued his new life. Events, interviews, Olivia at his side, smiles in photos. But something inside him was out of place. He started sleeping poorly, getting irritated by small things. He would wake up with the feeling of being late for something he didn't know what it was. And whenever he passed a bakery, he would remember the smell of her home. It was an official separation. But what the two of them still didn't know, or didn't want to admit, is that certain stories aren't erased. They hide. They wait, until the day life decides to bring them back, with force, with questions, and with a child's gaze that no one can ignore. How do you think Ethan will react when he finds out Clara was pregnant? Will he try to get her back? Comment your thoughts below. The goalkeeper with the secret. Leo was born on a rainy morning in Guadalajara. There were no photographers or expensive flowers in the room. Just Clara, her mother, a kind nurse, and the hurried breathing of a baby who came into the world as if to say, "I'm here, and I'm strong." Clara cried, not from pain, but from an ancient relief, as if something in her soul had finally found its place. She held him in her arms for the first time with a mix of fear and fascination. He was small, dark-haired, with restless hands. He had a stubborn cowlick on the crown of his head and a serious expression, as if he already knew how difficult life would be. Clara looked into his eyes and promised, right then and there, "You will never feel alone." Life after that became something else. Waking up every hour, bathing him carefully, learning to interpret cries. The exhaustion was real, but there was a new energy that was born every day, even when her body said otherwise. Ilara, the grandmother, became a battle companion. She made nutritious stews. She rocked the baby while Clara slept for a few minutes on the couch. Over time, the community around them came into the picture. The bakery customers, neighbors of faith and strength, brought used clothes, diapers, advice. Some even took turns staying with the baby when Clara needed to go out. The local coach, Coach Martinez, a family friend, offered her a part-time job, taking care of the local soccer school. It was with Coach Martinez that Leo took his first kicks at a ball. He couldn't even walk well yet, but he already smiled when he heard the whistle. Clara watched from a distance, holding a water bottle, looking at her son as if she were watching a seed sprout in the middle of concrete. She knew his life would be full of obstacles, but she also knew that he carried a rare light. Money was tight. Sometimes it barely covered the month's bills, but there was dignity. There was a quiet calm in knowing that everything Leo received came from love, not obligation. Every mended blouse, every shared meal, was another brick in the construction of a future that she still didn't know what it would look like, but that she was determined to keep standing. The nights were long. Leo had fever crises, teething pains, nightmares with thunder. Clara learned everything by force, with her head on the pillow and her heart on alert. She never called Ethan, never sent him a letter, never asked for anything, not because she didn't feel anger or sadness, but because she decided from the beginning that she would be strong. For her, for Leo. As the years passed, the boy grew up with a ball at his feet and curiosity in his eyes. He liked stories, laughter, playing impromptu soccer with flip-flops. He had the spirit of someone who doesn't give up easily. and a look, that same intense, ready look, that Ethan would recognize years later without knowing where it came from. Clara only told him the essentials about his father. She told him that he had followed another path, that sometimes life was like that. It separates people without them understanding why, but it always completes itself. What matters is that you are loved, and you are here, with me. That's already a lot. Leo grew up with less than he needed, but with more than many people have. He had affection, a role model, and a woman who faced the world every day just to see him smile. And even without knowing it, he carried in his body the traits of a past that would one day come knocking on his door. The sun was already setting in the sky when the game began. The municipal stadium of Tlaquepaque was full, but it wasn't the kind of noisy crowd you see at professional games. It was a mix of smiles, makeshift chairs, children hanging from the fences, and parents with cell phones ready to record every play. In the middle of all that, there he was, Leo, with his big blue gloves and eyes full of the world. Ethan was on the side of the field, invited as a sponsor of the tournament. But this time, he didn't feel at ease. It was as if he were treading on sacred ground. His eyes didn't leave the boy. With every step, with every save, the certainty grew like a dull heartbeat in his chest. He's my son. He didn't need proof or confirmation. That was instinct. Leo played with a grit that surprised the adults. He yelled at the defenders like an experienced coach. He encouraged his teammates even when they made mistakes, and when he made a difficult save, he celebrated with a smile that lightened the mood of the entire stadium. He seemed to be afraid of nothing. Not the ball, not the noise, not the expectation. The game was tense. Leo's team let in a goal in the first half, but he didn't flinch. He organized the defense. He asked for calm. He gave a thumbs up to the coach. In the stands, Clara watched with bated breath. Ilara held a wet towel, ready for any emergency. Coach Martinez gave firm but discreet instructions. Everyone knew. That child was special. In the second half, the game was tied. And with it, nervousness. The game went to penalty kicks. A heavy silence spread through the stadium. Ethan, standing near the sideline, felt his hands sweating. He wasn't the businessman now. He wasn't the sponsor. He was just a man, watching a boy who, even without knowing it, carried his blood. Leo walked to the goal with slow, firm steps. He touched the red ribbon on his wrist, the one Clara had given him as a sign of protection, and got into position. He took a deep breath. His teammates hugged each other in the middle of the field. The coach whispered a last word of encouragement. Ethan barely blinked. The entire stadium seemed to hold its breath. The shot was strong. To the left corner, Leo launched himself with the precision of an adult. He flew like a cat. He touched the ball with his fingertips, and he saved it. The stands exploded. The parents screamed. His teammates hugged him, and he ran in circles with his arms open, like someone who knew he had done more than just save a goal. He had made history. Ethan felt a tear fall. He didn't try to hide it. No one around him noticed. But inside, he was a whirlwind. The emotion was so strong that it seemed difficult to even stand up. In that moment, he didn't just see the boy's talent. He saw his bravery. He saw his genuine joy. He saw everything he could have lost, and perhaps could still get back. He knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. The doubt was over. And love, that love that came late but was complete, was already there, throbbing in his chest, like a crowd at a championship final. The game was over. The joy of the children resonated on the field, and the parents began to collect backpacks, water bottles, and torn-up paper. Ethan, however, couldn't move. His eyes searched for Clara in the crowd, like someone searching for air. And when he finally saw her, a few feet from the side door, he knew he couldn't let her go. She was walking fast, with Leo at her side. The medal hung from the boy's neck, who still seemed intoxicated by the victory. Ethan quickened his pace. He didn't know what he would say. He hadn't rehearsed anything. He just knew he needed to talk to her. He needed to look her in the eyes without the filters of the past. "Clara," he said, almost without a voice. She stopped. She looked at him with that direct gaze he knew so well. There was no anger, but there was no affection either. There was tiredness. There was a world between them. Leo kept walking, distracted with his friends ahead. Clara waited for him to get away before she said anything. "You came looking for me 6 years too late," she said, without raising her voice, but with enough firmness to hurt. Ethan swallowed. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to go back in time. But all that seemed small compared to what she had faced alone. Still, he tried. "I just want to talk, to understand, to know about him, about you, about what I lost." Clara crossed her arms. She took a deep breath. For a second, Ethan saw in her the woman he had once loved, and who still disconcerted him with the same calmness. "If you want to talk, that's fine, but on conditions. No drama, no promises, no excuses. And away from Leo. He doesn't need this whirlwind right now." Ethan nodded. He didn't even try to negotiate. His heart was leaping as if he were 20 again. But life now demanded maturity. Clara looked at the empty field behind him, and for an instant her eyes moistened, but she quickly composed herself. "Tomorrow morning, my mother's bakery, before the rush, 7 in the morning." And without waiting for a reply, she turned around and followed her son. Ethan was left standing there, with the echo of her words in his chest. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't a new beginning. But it was... Door ajar, and he wasn't going to stop knocking. "What do you think Clara and Ethan will talk about at the bakery? Can they find a way to make it work? Tell us your thoughts below." The hard truth. The clock still read 6:50 when Ethan arrived at the bakery. The city had barely woken up. Some lights were still flickering, as if hesitant to light up the day. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the street, mixed with the sweet aroma of cinnamon. He walked in silently, almost as if he were asking permission to step on sacred ground. Clara was already there, sitting in the corner of the shop, with a coffee in front of her and her apron folded on her lap. There were no customers yet, just the two of them, the worn wooden table, and a past that pulsed between the morning's objects. Ethan sat down without saying anything. He looked around. Everything there seemed familiar, and at the same time distant, like a dream you try to remember when you wake up. "Thank you for being on time," she said simply. Ethan tried to smile, but the tension was so great that even that seemed rehearsed. Clara didn't waste time with small talk. She started by talking about the pregnancy, about the scare, the decision not to tell him, the fear of asking for help and not being heard. She talked about the sleepless nights, the high fevers, the double shifts to pay the rent and buy diapers. She spoke calmly, but each sentence weighed like a stone on the table. Ethan listened in silence, his eyes moist. He felt his throat tighten. Every detail she narrated was an open wound in him, not because of what she was saying, but because of what he was never there to see. He never held Leo in his arms, never heard his first cry, never was present for the small victories that build a home. Clara spoke with truth, but without cruelty. She didn't want to hurt. She just needed him to know. Not to accuse, but to release, because there were things that, kept for a long time, become chains. And she wanted to free herself from them, not out of revenge, but for peace. After a long silence, Ethan finally spoke. "I can't change what I did or what I failed to do, but I truly want to be a part of his life, even if it's little by little, even if I'm late. I want to get to know my son, Clara." She took a deep breath, looked him in the eyes. For the first time, she saw an Ethan who wasn't trying to win, to convince, or to fix. He was just there, vulnerable, and she knew that was rare, very rare. "He doesn't know who you are, and I'm not going to just blurt it out. If you really want to be present, you'll have to prove it, not with words, but with time and respect." Ethan nodded. He didn't ask for more. He didn't demand. He understood the boundaries, and he promised with his eyes what his mouth still didn't know how to say. "I'm going to be here, and I won't leave again." Ethan showed up at the soccer school practice on a Wednesday afternoon, with a soft sun and a light breeze. He stood in the corner of the field, quiet, watching. He didn't want to introduce himself. He didn't want to show off. Coach Martinez, the coach, recognized him from afar and nodded his head. He had already been warned. Ethan was now Uncle Ethan, a friend of the community interested in the kids' soccer. Leo ran around the field with the energy of someone who isn't afraid. He was light, attentive, focused. When Coach Martinez called him to get some water and introduced him to Ethan, the boy looked at him with suspicion. Not a malicious suspicion, but because children feel what isn't said. Ethan knelt down and smiled. "I've heard a lot about your game," he said. "You have a future." Leo gave him a half smile, one of those that holds both sides of the coin, the pride of being praised and the curiosity about who is doing the praising. In the following weeks, Ethan returned, always in the same corner, always without intruding. Sometimes he would bring new soccer balls. Other times, he would just stand and watch. Sometimes, he would tell stories of famous goalkeepers, of legendary saves, of unforgettable games. The boy started waiting for him. He would arrive at the field and look toward the corner of the wall, looking for that man with the clean-shaven beard and sad eyes. When Ethan was absent because of a trip or a meeting, Leo would ask about him at the end of practice. "Is Uncle Ethan coming tomorrow?" Coach Martinez would smile and reply, "I think so." Ethan began to help with small things. He fixed the water pump in the locker room. He had new floodlights installed. He donated uniforms for the younger teams, but everything was done discreetly, without photos, without his name on anything. Clara had been clear. No boasting, no spectacle. And he complied. One day, after a difficult save, Leo ran to Ethan at the end of practice and asked, "Were you a goalkeeper too?" Ethan smiled. "Almost. I played a lot in goal when I was a kid. I wasn't as good as you." That was when the boy took the first step. He sat on the bench next to him and started asking him questions about how to kick the ball, about the best way to jump, about how not to be afraid. Ethan answered everything calmly, without rushing. Each answer was a stitch in that budding relationship. Clara watched it all from a distance. She didn't interfere, but she also didn't stop watching. She saw her son opening up. She saw Ethan trying, and inside, she was fighting against two feelings: the relief of seeing Leo smiling, and the fear that it would all fall apart. Because when a child starts to trust, the fall can be even more painful. But what Clara still didn't know, and what Ethan was beginning to discover, is that love, when it is born with patience, has stronger roots than time. What do you think will be the biggest challenge for Ethan and Clara now? What will they need to overcome? The public truth. What begins in silence does not always remain that way. Ethan knew it, but he preferred to believe that he had some control. He visited practices discreetly, kept his distance from the press, and made donations without drawing attention. But in a big company, with watchful eyes and interests greater than affection, secrets don't last long. Olivia, Ethan's fiancée, was the first to sniff out the change. She sensed the more human way Ethan was treating certain projects, the time he was wasting on social initiatives, his subtle withdrawal from more aggressive meetings. She started to investigate, and what she found was not exactly a scandal, but it could be sold as one. Photos of Ethan with Clara around the bakery, records of him talking to Leo at practices, old screenshots from past events. It was enough to put it all together, mix it with insinuations, and hand it over to the right channels. In a few days, the press started talking about a hidden son, an opportunistic reconciliation, a betrayal of the influential fiancé. The headlines don't forgive what they don't understand. Olivia, who already suspected Ethan's distancing, took advantage of the moment. She went to the media, confirmed the broken engagement, and insinuated that Clara was interested in money and not affection. She said rehearsed phrases, posed for photos with a hurt look and a proud smile. It was a game of image, and Ethan was now the villain of the day. Ethan found out about the bomb on his way to a practice. He stopped the car, read the headlines, saw the photos, and felt his blood run cold. His first reaction was to run to Clara, but of course she already knew. She always knew before he did. When he arrived at the bakery, she already had swollen eyes and was out of breath. "I should have known that world would drag you back in," she said without screaming, but with the pain stuck in her chest. Ethan tried to explain that he hadn't leaked anything, that he was trying to protect them, that he didn't want that exposure. But Clara didn't want justifications. She wanted security for her son. And in that moment, the only certainty she had was that Leo needed distance from all of this. "He's just a child, Ethan, not a shield, not a story for the press to play with." She took the boy off the team, canceled practices, and asked for time. Ethan understood. He didn't argue or insist. He just promised, once again, that he would take care of his part, and that he wouldn't let the truth be distorted. But the headwind was strong, and this time, it wasn't enough to just wait for it to pass. Ethan would have to stand his ground, or he would be swept away. The crisis erupted like a bolt of lightning in a clear sky. In less than 48 hours, Ethan found himself at the center of a storm. Sensational headlines, malicious comments on social media, canceled meetings, tense phone calls. The investors wanted explanations. The board of directors demanded a stance. Journalists surrounded the foundation and Clara's mother's house. It was chaos. But strangely, Ethan didn't run. For years, he had run from scandals. He paid for silence, he cut ties, he did everything to maintain a clean image. But now, looking at everything that was at stake, he understood that losing his image was better than losing the opportunity to be a real father. For the first time, he decided to face the world with the truth in his hands, even if it cost him dearly. He called a press conference. No suit, no marketing team, just a chair, a microphone, and a glass of water. He started by saying he wouldn't defend himself. He would make a recognition. He talked about the reunion with Clara, about Leo, about the years he spent away without knowing the boy existed. He admitted that he had been wrong, that he was a coward in the past, and that he wasn't there to clean up his story, but to write another one. He protected Clara. He said that she never asked for anything, never went to the newspapers, never took advantage of his position, that all she did was take care of a son with dignity and silence. Ethan apologized to the city, to the community that believed in the Vance Foundation, and he promised that the social projects would continue, with or without him. The reaction was a mix of astonishment and respect. Some contracts were indeed canceled. Conservative businessmen backed out. Olivia published a formal breakup note and withdrew from the scene with the elegance of someone who knows how to lose strategically. But in the streets, something different began to happen. People saw something new in Ethan, the courage to shed the persona. Volunteers from the foundation continued to show up. Parents of the children sent messages of support. A group of neighborhood residents offered to form a council and help in the management of the projects. Ethan, for the first time, didn't try to control everything. He listened, he accepted criticism, and he committed again. But this time with more humility than strategy. Clara watched the conference on television, with Leo in her arms. She didn't cry, but she was silent for a long time. When the reporter asked if Ethan would still be a part of his son's life, he replied, "Only if he and his mother want me to, and in the right way, without haste, without the spotlight, just with my presence." That night, Ethan went to sleep alone, with no contracts to review, with no phone ringing. But he slept in peace. For the first time in many years, he wasn't running from himself. And that strange calm that was born in the middle of the hurricane, made him understand that perhaps he was finally on the right path. Because sometimes, it's only when everything falls apart that you discover what you're really made of. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. The call for help. It was a night of fine rain. The sky rumbled softly, not enough to truly scare, at least not the adults. But in that neighborhood of narrow streets and old lampposts, the sounds took on a stronger echo. Suddenly, fireworks went off, coming from a nearby celebration, and the noise spread a scare through the neighborhood. Inside the building, Leo woke up with a tight chest and the air slowly escaping him. Clara realized it instantly. Her son was trying to talk, but his voice came out choppy, as if he were swallowing his breath. She picked him up and ran down the stairs, screaming for help. In the street, Ethan had just delivered a shipment of soccer balls to Coach Martinez. He heard the scream and ran without a second thought. He didn't ask any questions. He just acted. He took Leo in his arms, got into the car, and sped toward the nearest hospital. Clara was by his side, trying to stay calm, but her eyes were full of tears. In the back seat, the boy was breathing with difficulty, clutching the red ribbon on his wrist as if it were a shield. Ethan drove in silence, his jaw clenched. Fear was a real animal inside him. In the emergency room, they were seen quickly. Dr. Jimena, a local pediatrician, recognized Leo as soon as she saw him. She gave him medication, gave him a nebulizer treatment, and ordered tests. She said the crisis was controlled, but that they needed to better manage his stress. Sensitive children feel the world in their bodies, and Leo, even with his bravery, was still just a child. Clara sat on the side of the bed, stroking her son's sweaty hair. Ethan stayed on the other side, holding his small hand gently. For a few minutes, no one said anything. The monitor beeped softly. Outside, the rain intensified. Inside, the silence was another kind of conversation. A reunion without words, built with moist eyes and intertwined fingers. When Leo fell asleep, the two of them went out into the hallway. Ethan leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Clara looked at him, tired, but without resentment. And then, as if she were handing him an old key, she said, "I never thought I'd see you in a moment like this. Taking care of us, present." Ethan didn't try to defend himself. He didn't say he had changed. He simply replied, "I thought so too. But I'm here and I'm not leaving." She nodded slowly. The anger, which was once fire, was now just embers. Still hot, still hurting, but without the strength to consume everything. In that dawn, in front of a hospital that smelled of alcohol and hope, they promised something that was worth more than old vows. They wouldn't turn Leo into a battlefield, because in the end, between poorly resolved love and the fear of what was to come, there was something more important. And that something had a name, brown eyes, and an entire future ahead of it. What do you think will be the next step for Ethan and Clara? Will she finally trust him? Tell us your thoughts below. A new chapter. After that night at the hospital, Ethan understood that he could no longer hide his feelings under the rug. For the first time, he sought help. He scheduled a therapy session without telling anyone. He sat on the couch and spoke little at first, but over time, the words flowed. They came like an avalanche, like water held back for years. He talked about his demanding father, about the silences that hurt more than screams, about the confusion between success and worthiness. He understood that for a long time he believed he needed to be admired to be loved, and for that, he sacrificed what was simple, what was true. He cried in the first few sessions and was not ashamed of it. Meanwhile, Clara continued in her own way. She watched, she felt. There were still wounds, but there was also room for something new. Ethan no longer forced things. He arrived on time. He brought books for Leo. He watched practices from afar when she asked for space. Little by little, Clara began to leave the door ajar, and he respected the pace. They sat together one day, without rushing, to talk about what really mattered. Leo. They decided to establish a routine. Ethan would pick him up after practices on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Saturdays, they would have lunch together, just the two of them. No photos, no social media. The priority was the child's well-being, not appearances. Coach Martinez, the coach, became a link between the two. He helped with scheduling, gave practical advice, and every now and then served as an emotional counselor without even realizing it. Leo loved being with him, with his mother, and with Uncle Ethan, who was now just Ethan, and more, something more. Ilara, the grandmother, prepared stews that brought everyone together at the table. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with intention, to keep affection as a bridge. During those lunches, they talked about school, about homework, about how the goalkeeper Ochoa saved impossible balls. Life, suddenly, began to smell of good food and sound like low laughter. Ethan taught Leo how to plant his feet firmly before a jump. He showed him old videos of memorable saves, but he also listened. He listened to his son talk about fears, about small joys, about doubts that are born in children's hearts. And there, in the intervals between the words, something beautiful was being built. A bond, not just of blood, but of real presence. Clara watched all of this with some suspicion, but also with a relief she didn't know she needed. For the first time, she could rest her shoulders a little. She knew that Leo finally had two arms ready to hold him when the world wobbled. And that made all the difference. There were no exaggerated promises or soap opera phrases, just simple agreements, built with respect. And deep down, that's what Clara had always wanted. That love wouldn't come like a hurricane, but like a routine. Like something that, with time, proves it's there to stay. Olivia never accepted Ethan's change well. She believed it was a phase, a distraction, sentimentality disguised as kindness. For her, companies were built with a firm hand, not with visits to neighborhood fields. When she realized that Ethan was truly getting involved with that community, that he had given up the engagement and the impeccable image, she decided to act. She called an extraordinary meeting of the company's board. She arrived with a folder full of papers and an inflated ego. She presented figures of lost contracts, reports from worried investors, and as the cherry on top, Ethan's history of emotional instability. Everything was well rehearsed, Everything was calculated to cause an impact. But Ethan, this time, didn't defend himself with the old corporate speech. He got up, took only one sheet of paper, and spoke. He spoke calmly, looking into the eyes of his colleagues. He said he had been wrong. Yes, that he had allowed success to take him away from what really mattered, but that he had come back, not to the past, but to the essential. He explained that the foundation was no longer a marketing arm. It was now a real project. He showed photos of the children, of the renovated fields, of the volunteer mothers, of the coaches who left other jobs to teach discipline with a ball at their feet. He said that if he had to choose between the board and a real impact, he had already chosen. And he was at peace with it. The room fell silent. What was intended to be an attack turned into an invitation to reflect. Some older board members, who had known Ethan since the beginning, nodded in silence. Others asked for more time to evaluate. But the most surprising thing was what came next. Ethan proposed something new, a community council within the foundation, with parents, coaches, teachers, and young people. Grassroots people. People who knew where it hurt. The idea seemed audacious, even utopian. But it gained traction, not out of strategy, but out of necessity. The company had been losing relevance in the social sector, and that living initiative had results. It had history. It had faces. In a few weeks, the pilot project was approved. Ethan would continue in a leadership role, but now with open ears and seats occupied by those who rarely have a voice. Olivia, defeated without being humiliated, remained silent. She left the meeting with hurried steps and averted glances. She would try again in other ways, but in that moment she understood that her ex-fiancé was no longer the same. Ethan no longer needed to protect himself. He needed to simply be honest with what he felt. In the neighborhoods, the news traveled fast. The mothers smiled with relief. The children trained with more enthusiasm. More donations arrived, but curiously, without asking for publicity. Ethan made it clear. Now, everything was done with transparency. Those who helped because they believed, and those who received had a name, a face, and a story. The foundation grew, not in size, but in roots. It created bonds. It extended its arms. Ethan, once a symbol of power, became a bridge. And that, little by little, changed everything. What will happen next in Ethan and Clara's relationship? Will they finally be able to be a family? Comment your thoughts below. A forever team, the sky was painted orange when the new championship final arrived. The stands were more full, but also more cared for. The paint was new, the floodlights were secure, and the benches had the names of the donors engraved on small plaques. Ethan was there again, but not as before. Not in the center, not distant. He was present, whole. Leo walked onto the field, with the same eyes as always, only now with more lightness in his chest. He knew he had someone waiting for him at the end of the game. He knew his mother was truly smiling, and that Uncle Ethan no longer missed a single practice. But there was something he still didn't know, something that pulsed between silences and crossed glances. The night before, Ethan called Clara for a conversation. They were sitting on the sidewalk in front of the bakery, with the smell of still warm bread coming from the cracks in the window. He spoke calmly. He said he no longer wanted to hide, that Leo had the right to know who he was, that he wanted to tell him, with her consent and in the right way. Clara listened in silence. She took a deep breath. After everything, after the falls and the new beginnings, she felt that she could finally trust. She looked at Ethan and said, "Only if it's with love, and with the proper presence, not with promises." Coach Martinez was called to help, not out of obligation, but out of affection. He was a firm figure in Leo's life, a second father in many ways. And that morning, in the locker room before the final, they were all there. Clara, Coach Martinez, and Ethan. The boy arrived smiling, tying his shoes, talking about the game, until he noticed the more serious atmosphere. Ethan knelt down to his level, took the red ribbon from the boy's wrist, held it between his fingers, looked into Leo's eyes, carefully, and said, "I have something to tell you, something important. You know I love you very much, right?" Leo nodded, suspicious. Ethan continued, "I am your dad, for real. I know I was late in showing up. I know I wasn't there for your first goals or for the difficult days, but I'm here now, and I want to stay, if you let me." The boy froze, looked at his mother, who smiled tenderly, looked at Coach Martinez, who nodded slowly, and then he returned to Ethan with a simple but all-encompassing question. "Are you really going to stay? Like, on sunny days and on rainy days?" Ethan swallowed the emotion, squeezed the small hand, and replied, "Yes, on good days, on difficult days, in the games you win, and in the ones you mess up too. Every morning, and every night too." Leo didn't say anything. He just hugged his father, a complete hug that asked for no apologies or explanations, only acceptance, only a beginning. There, in the tight locker room, 3 people became a new family. Not perfect, but real. The locker room was silent after the revelation. Outside, the drums of the cheerleaders were already starting to beat, impatient for the final to begin. But inside, time seemed to have stopped. Ethan was still crouched, his hand holding the ribbon on Leo's wrist, while Clara and Coach Martinez watched closely. The whole world seemed to be focused on that answer. Leo looked at his father for a few seconds. His brown eyes were looking for some truth beyond the phrase, as if he wanted to know if the love there was real, or just another promise with a departure time. Then, in a low but firm voice, he asked, "Are you really going to stay? Even when I mess up? When I'm not so good in goal?" Ethan felt his chest tighten. The boy's words didn't come from doubt. They came from fear. And there, he understood clearly that more than introducing himself as a father, he needed to prove that he would be a refuge, that he wasn't going to disappear when the world got heavy. "I'm going to stay, Leo, on sunny days and on rainy ones, when you make that incredible save, and when you let in a silly goal too. I'll be at the school meetings, at your birthdays, on boring Sundays, because loving isn't just showing up in the shine, it's holding your hand in the dark too." Clara watched the scene with her eyes full. She knew that this moment could happen, but nothing prepared her heart to see her son discover that the love he was waiting for had returned, and not as before, full of haste or fear, but with roots, with substance. Leo moved closer and hugged Ethan, a complete hug that lasted long enough to say everything they still didn't know how to put into words. Ethan closed his eyes and cried this time, without trying to hide it. Clara, on the side, moved slowly and hugged them both as well. There, in that silent circle of arms and new promises, something stronger than the past was born. A type of family that is not built with a birth certificate, but with presence, with repetition, with the decision to stay. Outside, the game was about to begin. But in that instant, the greatest goal of the day had already happened. And it wasn't on the scoreboard. It was in that embrace. The game was intense. Leo defended with everything he had. He shouted, he directed, he flew from side to side. But on the last penalty, the ball passed between his fingertips. It went in slowly, as if asking for forgiveness. The final whistle blew, and the team lost. There was an instant of silence, but no one cried, because that afternoon, defeat didn't have a bitter taste. Leo looked at the sky, took a deep breath, and smiled. For the first time, defeat didn't mean loneliness. Ethan was on the edge of the field, with his arms open. Clara in the stands applauded with shining eyes. The boy ran, hugged his father, and then his mother. The team around them applauded. Some fans didn't even know what they were applauding, but they felt that something important had happened. In the ceremony, Ethan handed out the medals with a serene smile. When he got to his son, he knelt down and said, "Today you were the best goalkeeper in the world, not because you saved everything, but because you stood your ground, because you had courage." Clara approached. Ethan looked at her and spoke right there in front of the city. "I want to build a family, not a facade, not a pretty picture, a real one, with time, with respect, with mistakes, and with love. If you want to walk with me, I'm ready." She took a deep breath. She looked at Leo, at the city, at everything they had been through. And then she replied, "I love the freedom I have won, but I love even more to see my son grow up with a father by his side and a mother at peace. We will walk, one step at a time." The three of them held hands. Nothing solemn, nothing rehearsed, just a silent decision not to let fear rule anymore. The field was emptying, but the echo of that choice remained. It remained in the children who saw it. It remained in the city, which learned that starting over is braver than winning. The foundation grew bigger, not with money, but with trust. Ethan visited the bakery in the mornings and learned to knead his own bread. Clara went back to school. She opened a soccer school for emotional education. Leo continued to play in goal, and in between, he practiced the steps that now connected him, without shame, to his father. The city became the stage for a story that began with silence and ended in truth. Because in the end, the strongest love isn't the one that arrives first. It's the one that stays, the one that learns, the one that is rebuilt with patience. And when the crowd leaves, when the stadium falls silent, what remains are the joined hands and the daily choice to continue. Please leave your opinion on this incredible story in the comments. If you liked it, share it and subscribe to the channel to support our work. Another story is appearing on your screen that will probably also touch your heart. Don't go anywhere.